Breaking news out of the NBA. The Phoenix Suns are hiring Frank Vogel as their next head coach. That's per multiple reports. Vogel was most recently in charge of the Los Angeles Lakers. He led them to an NBA title in the bubble back in 2020. He'll reportedly get a 5-year deal worth $31 million with the Suns. Vogel will replace Monty Williams in Phoenix, who was fired after the Suns' second-round playoff loss to the Nuggets. Now joined by our NBA insider and NBA expert, Bill Reiter. Bill, busy covering the NBA Finals, and now we have this news coming out with the Phoenix Suns choosing Frank Vogel reportedly to be their guy. First off, your initial reaction to this, and help me make sense of this hire.
Yeah, it's the musical chairs of championship coaches, or in Monty Williams' case, near championship coaches, just switching jobs. Obviously, Vogel been out of a job for a while. I actually think it's a pretty interesting hire and maybe a pretty good one because he fits a very similar mold to Monty Williams. This is a defensive first-minded guy. That's something Monty Williams is all about and will certainly bring to Detroit. So Vogel should be able to slip right in there and make sure that the defensive effort and energy of that Suns team continues. And a secondary part about, I think, Vogel's skill set that's been a little overlooked is his ability to manage massive egos, massive stars, the realities of the chemistry of a locker room with big-time personalities. He did a great job with that in Los Angeles, even though he eventually lost that job, and that'll certainly be a challenge with Kevin Durant if Chris Paul remains with him, with Devin Booker, with DeAndre Ayton. So it makes sense, and it just continues this trend of really talented coaches losing jobs after success and then finding big-time, lucrative jobs shortly thereafter.
You mentioned Vogel and the work that he was able to do with the Lakers, being able to work with the personality and the star level of someone like LeBron. We knew that worked at least to be able to get a championship, and now when he has the pairing of a Kevin Durant, of a Devin Booker, how do you look at Frank Vogel as a head coach, seeing that he was able to get it done in LA but was not able to in Indiana or in Orlando?
I think it's the reality that is the NBA, and it's I think what Eric Spoelstra has done in this finals is incredible. You don't have superstars, and I mean multiple superstars. You really don't have a legitimate chance to win championships. I can tell you what people around the NBA think about Frank Vogel, though it's worth saying they hold Monty Williams in high regard, they hold Mike Budenholzer in high regard, they hold Nick Nurse in high regard, and these are talented guys who probably shouldn't have been on the market. But the MO on Vogel is he's a great X's and O's guy. Like Eric Spoelstra, he came up through the video room in his career, which means thousands of hours of watching tape and a fairly difficult path to an NBA head coaching position. And he's well-liked and well-respected. He's not as sexy a name, not as big a name as some of the other guys that are out there, maybe because he's been away from the game for a little bit, but very well-respected. And just looking at my phone here as we're talking, some of the responses that are coming back from colleagues of his, now competitors, is respect in the sense it's a pretty good hire for a pretty good basketball mind who now takes over this job.
What should priority number one for Vogel be? Is it to be able to get the buy-in from the stars of Booker and KD? Is it trying to get more out of DeAndre Ayton, who we saw struggle in the playoffs, or figuring out Chris Paul and the health of him? What's top of the list for him?
Yeah, it's a great question. You would hope that buy-in is not required because the new process now is that stars are going to interview as part of the process and sign off on coaches. Giannis Antetokounmpo signed off on Adrian Griffin in Milwaukee. Joel Embiid was part of the interview process for Nick Nurse. But who knows what's going on with this Phoenix organization? Their ownership, their new ownership, to say the least, has been interesting. So let's presume that he's already got buy-in from those guys. I think it's going to be able to coach a team with championship expectations that doesn't have a lot of depth. They gave that away to bring in Kevin Durant. There is no window in which they can take their time to get it done. So I think Vogel's going to have to find a way to take some of these lesser names and squeeze production out of them, make sure DeAndre Ayton feels the buy-in because he was not happy under Monty Williams, and get the most and maximize the most out of a talented but thin roster because it's championship or nothing in terms of how the Suns view what they need to get done this upcoming season.
Yeah, that time to win is now for the Suns. Time for the Raptors to find a head coach now because they're the only opening left out there in the association. Where do you think things might pan out for them in Toronto?
Yeah, it's interesting because Masai Ujiri, obviously, who runs basketball operations, is incredibly highly respected and is not afraid to make surprise hires or make surprise decisions. Nick Nurse, other than in Toronto, came out of nowhere when he got elevated several years ago as the head coach there. So while Doc Rivers is still on the board and Mike Budenholzer is still on the board, both championship contenders, my understanding of Toronto is it's going to be a wide-ranging process, and the people I've talked to Don't know what's going to happen because Masai Ujiri is a very difficult guy to read, and we'll take a long and serious look at candidates worth thinking about and probably some we're not.
Our NBA insider Bill Reiter joining us with the breaking news about the Phoenix Suns reportedly hiring Frank Vogel to be their next head coach. Thank you very much for your time, Bill. And you look at that carousel that we mentioned, just the Raptors, the lone team, needing to figure out who their new head man will be as we head into next season, get ready to end this season with the finals going on, but it's the Suns picking Frank Vogel to be their man.
And we can now tell you that our own Bill Reiter has confirmed that this is indeed happening. Frank Vogel is now head coach of the Phoenix Suns. Let's bring in our own head coach, Avery Johnson, to discuss his coach. Before we came on, I asked you what you thought about this, and you said you were a little surprised. So why were you a little surprised to hear that Vogel's now with the Suns?
Well, from all of the different rumors from folks that they were the insiders, you heard, assistant coaches like Coach Young that was with Monty Williams and Doc Rivers were in the lead. You didn't really hear Frank Vogel's name at the top of the list, but this is what happens. I remember when I got a couple of my coaching jobs, my name wasn't necessarily at the top of the list, and I ended up, jumping over everybody that was leapfrogging everybody that was in the process and ended up getting a head coaching job. Really what this is about, I don't think this is about just this team that they have because Kevin Durant's 35 years old. And Chris Paul obviously is at the back tail end of his career. This is about that third, fourth, fifth, sixth year of Frank Vogel's contract when all of those guys probably are going to be gone. This is the guy that they want to have a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship with. Sure, they're going to try to win the championship next year. They probably got a 2-year window with this team. But I think this is more about a long-term move than in the short term.
Coach, how did his experience with the Lakers and winning that title in 2020 prepare him for what he's going to take on with the Phoenix Suns?
Well, I'm sure that was very helpful. That championship was in the bubble. They had a lot of different adversity, and all of the teams that were in the bubble at that time. But I think more than that championship title with the Lakers, I just think his whole overall coaching resume in general was probably what ownership thought was a best fit for them. I still thought Doc Rivers was in the lead, even though folks want to talk about Doc Rivers with some of his playoff losses. I thought he was the best fit for Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. But Frank Vogel is a very well-established coach, very well-respected, terrific defensive mind. So we'll see what happens. And maybe that's the guy that they think can connect the best if they have to keep DeAndre Ayton around. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, respect seems to be a word that comes up whenever Vogel's name is mentioned, certainly for this position, as our Bill Reiter indicated a little bit earlier talking about this. So, Coach, if you're the new man of the Phoenix Suns, it's day one. What is the first thing that you're going to do?
Well, you got to figure out what you're going to do with Chris Paul. I mean, that's the biggest deal. Chris Paul, unfortunately, just can't stay healthy, in the playoffs, when they need him the most. I would have loved to have seen what would have happened with this team had Chris Paul been healthy. So I think Chris Paul is 1A, and then DeAndre Ayton is 1B. What are you doing there? You're going to trade him, or you're going to try to see if Frank Vogel can get the best out of him. But more than anything, you have to really improve the depth of this team. This team lost a lot when they lost Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges and a lot of those guys that provided length and depth coming off the bench, and they just didn't have that type of role players that you see now with teams that the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat are in the finals for a reason. Teams like the Boston Celtics made it to the Eastern Conference Finals because they're a deep team and arguably one of the more talented teams. So the Suns, between Chris Paul, Ayton, and what are you going to do about the quality of depth, especially because Kevin Durant over the last, 3 to 5 years hasn't really been healthy. He hasn't played a full season. So they have a lot of question marks that need to be addressed from day one.
As you mentioned too, Coach, the window is open now for the Suns to win a title, and Frank Vogel, we'll see if he's the man that can take them over the hump. Our coach, Adrian Johnson, joining us to discuss the breaking news confirmed by our Bill Reiter that Frank Vogel is the new head coach of the Phoenix Suns. When we look at those title odds, you can see Phoenix right in there at 9-1. Nuggets sitting at plus 475, Celtics at plus 575. Of course, we're still working to crown a winner for this particular season, but looking at next year, Suns right in there at 9-1.